First, funding. We need more, and we need it quickly. And we need to be flexible enough to adapt to the fast-changing conditions on the ground. I urge you to support our flash appeal for $606 million to get urgent assistance to 11 million people in the next 4 months. Today, we are announcing a $20 million allocation from the UN Central Emergency Response Fund to support the humanitarian operation in Afghanistan. Second, we need your help to boost humanitarian access, including the air bridge with Kabul and other hubs in Afghanistan. The United Nations Humanitarian Air Service, UNHCR, established an air bridge from Islamabad into Kandahar, Mazar, and Herat, with operations running since the end of August. Yesterday, UNHCR flights were resumed from Islamabad to Kabul and are now fully operational across the country. This work must continue, and much more is needed. We need to be able to move aid workers and humanitarian supplies in and out of the country. We need unimpeded access to get to hotspots quickly, safely monitor response, and move relief items within the country. Third, we need to safeguard the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan, including through access to education and other essential services. One of the bright spots of Afghanistan today is the new generation of women leaders and entrepreneurs, educated and flourishing over the last 2 decades. Afghan women and girls want to ensure that gains are not lost, doors are not closed, and hope is not extinguished. This is central to the future of the country and every Afghan. Finally, we need to ensure that our humanitarian response saves lives, but also saves livelihoods. The people of Afghanistan are facing the collapse of an entire country all at once. Afghanistan faces a development emergency, and we must protect the progress of the 2 last decades. In doing so, we must ensure that local economies remain functional, that people can stay in their communities and in their homes, and that they have access to basic services, basic income, and social protection. The international community must find ways to make cash available to allow the Afghan economy to breathe. A total collapse would have devastating consequences to the people and risk to destabilize the neighboring countries with a massive outflow. Stopgap solutions are critical, but the Afghan people will need our support over the long haul. So too will member states generously opening their doors to Afghans forced to flee their country. And all member states must respect international refugee protection responsibilities. Our support must match the scale of the needs. Excellencies, I have visited Kabul many times over many years of conflict. These missions were full of horror, misery, and grief. But they were also marked by the hope, faith, and determination of the Afghan people I met. They want extreme poverty to be eradicated. They want decent jobs to be available. They want their lives and basic freedoms to be protected. They want their country free of insecurity and terror. In short, they want what every member of the human family wants and deserves, and we need to invest in that hope and promise. Allow me to close with a special word of admiration and gratitude to the United Nations staff and the entire aid community in Afghanistan, the vast majority of whom are Afghan nationals. They are doing extraordinary work throughout the country and have my full solidarity. Let us commit to support them as they support the Afghan people and to ensure they can do their work safely. Time is short and events move quickly in Afghanistan. Let's extend our lifeline to the people of Afghanistan and do everything we can and everything we owe to help them hold on to hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary-General, for those words and your appeal on behalf of the people of Afghanistan. I now give the floor to Mr. Martin Griffiths, the UN's Under-Secretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator. Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Secretary-General, for this meeting. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, last week, as the Secretary-General has already mentioned, I travelled to Afghanistan. There I met with the de facto authorities, with members of the humanitarian community, and with Afghan men and women. And I saw for myself the conditions on the ground and the work of the humanitarian community. I left in no doubt that the people of Afghanistan, especially Afghan women and girls, need us more than ever. The upheavals of recent weeks are deepening a pre-existing humanitarian crisis. They threaten, as the Secretary-General has already said, to tip the country into catastrophe. And we have already heard about the dire humanitarian needs in Afghanistan from the Secretary-General. We have all been watching, the whole world has been watching in horror, the scenes of turmoil and desperation unfolding in Afghanistan in recent weeks. And today is exactly about turning that concern into action. The humanitarian system needs immediate, generous, flexible funding. And you have been generous. Donors have given more than $500 million to the humanitarian response in Afghanistan in 2020, last year. And with that funding, agencies and national and international NGOs have helped 8 million people in Afghanistan so far this year. Your support to the Afghanistan Humanitarian Fund has allowed us to be at the forefront of the response, translating $70 million in donor pledges from many governments here present into life-saving humanitarian action by some 44 NGOs and local Afghan partners. But more is now needed. With the $606 million in this flash appeal today, we can help nearly 11 million people over the next 4 months. The lives of millions of Afghan civilians are at stake, and so any sanctions or counter-terrorism measures applied by member states must always exclude, exempt, impartial humanitarian activities from their scope. Excellencies, the humanitarian community stands with the people of Afghanistan, and we're determined to stick by them as they enter this next deeply uncertain phase. And as we help them deal with the immediate humanitarian crisis in front of us, we will also seek to protect, as already mentioned, those hard-won development gains. The role of women and girls is crucial, as anywhere. They must have access to education, they must have their rights and access to other essential services as anywhere else in the world. And a better future for Afghanistan in particular depends on the meaningful participation of women in all sectors of Afghanistan's economy and governance. I mentioned my visit to Kabul last week, where I met with the Taliban leadership, and we discussed and agreed on several important issues, and we have received assurances in writing subsequently. Please allow me to read some excerpts from this letter, and I quote, "We assure you that we will remove previous and current impediments in front of your assistance and all related projects working under supervision of UN and other international organizations in Afghanistan, and all partners will be fully allowed to help the vulnerable people in Afghanistan in the current situation. We will protect life, property, and honor of the humanitarian workers and will remove hurdles in front of them. We will safeguard the sanctity of the compounds of the United Nations and all other humanitarian organizations and will draft a mechanism on the basis of mutual consent. We have made it clear in all public forums that we are committed to all rights of women, rights of minorities, and principles of freedom of expression, in the light of religion and culture. Therefore, we once again reiterate our commitment and will gradually take concrete steps with the help of the international community. The letter also includes Taliban's requests for international support in a number of areas, to include reconstruction, counter-narcotics programs, the need for economic assistance, the return of Afghans on a safe basis, and a number of other factors. In Kabul, I gave my personal thanks, and those of the Secretary-General, to the humanitarian workers from UN agencies, national and international non-governmental organizations. We work with 156 partners in the Afghan humanitarian program. Afghanistan is a dangerous place to be an aid worker. These brave women and men, the majority of them Afghan nationals, put their lives on the line to help others. And I share the Secretary-General's thanks to each and every one of them. What we're doing here today is to do everything possible to ensure their efforts are sustained and expanded. The United Nations is rapidly increasing staff presence, mobility, and delivery to meet the extraordinary needs facing the people. The Secretary-General has already referred to the resumption of UN air operations, and we have also had written agreement and security commitments from the Taliban only yesterday as regards UN road missions, which have now started to take place from today. Now is the time not only to resume operations and mobility, but to expand beyond what was possible in recent years. And we face the prospect of winter. United Nations imports of essential supplies continue. For example, in the joint World Health Organization World Food Programme effort yesterday, a series of 3 planes delivered around 50 metric tons of essential drugs to Mazar-e-Sharif. And this is the second such delivery. Finally, sir, it is vital that Afghans do not lose hope. And our contribution to that is to speak clearly, contribute generously, and work quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin, also for your appeal. And I now give the floor to Ms. Sofia Sprechmann-Cenero, Secretary-General of CARE International, who is joining us virtually. The floor is yours, Sofia. May I ask the Secretary-General of CARE International to kindly switch to the conference and take the floor. Please unmute yourself before speaking. We are having issues connecting to the Secretary-General of CARE International. I suggest that we come back to her, and I turn to Your Excellencies and other distinguished guests for interventions from the floor and virtually. May I please make a request? We have this is a popular conference. We have so many participants wishing to take the floor in a limited period of time. So we're asking please to limit your statements to 3 minutes maximum so that all speakers today will have the chance to speak. I am very pleased. Here with us today is His Excellency, the Vice President and Head of Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, His Excellency, Mr. Ignacio Cassis. Mr. Cassis, you have the floor.
Merci Madame, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs. Une montagne, aussi élevée soit-elle, a un chemin qui mène au sommet. dit un proverbe afghan. Lorsqu'on contemple la situation en Afghanistan aujourd'hui, on a l'impression de se trouver au pied d'une montagne colossale. Face à celle-ci, nous ne devons pas nous décourager, car si nous mettons un pied devant l'autre, nous allons atteindre le sommet ensemble. La conférence d'aujourd'hui est un premier pas. Je remercie le secrétaire général d'avoir pris l'initiative à cet égard. Aujourd'hui, de nombreux représentants ont trouvé le chemin de Genève physiquement ou virtuellement. Cela témoigne de l'importance que nous attachons toutes et tous aux besoins urgents du peuple afghan. Mesdames et messieurs, le passé nous enseigne que c'est en formant une cordée qu'on gravit les sommets les plus hauts. C'est également une profonde expérience suisse liée à nos montagnes. Les besoins urgents du peuple afghan exigent une intervention humanitaire rapide, décisive et bien coordonnée. Il est dans l'esprit de Genève que de telles interventions humanitaires se réalisent. La Suisse reconnaît l'urgence des besoins. Le gouvernement suisse a proposé la semaine passée au Parlement de soutenir la réponse humanitaire urgente pour l'Afghanistan avec 33 millions de francs suisses, c'est-à-dire 4 francs suisses par tête d'habitant. Ceci s'ajoute à l'aide déjà promise ici lors de la conférence sur l'Afghanistan en 2020. Toutefois, le financement seul ne suffira pas. Il faut également agir sur place. Ceux qui contrôlent le terroir afghan ont la responsabilité de garantir un accès humanitaire sans entrave pour approvisionner la population. De même, ils doivent garantir la sécurité des acteurs humanitaires. En outre, le respect des droits de l'homme, en particulier la protection des minorités et des femmes et des filles, doit être assuré. Les progrès déjà accomplis maintenus. Chers amis, la détresse n'est pas synonyme d'impuissance. Rappelons l'objectif de cet événement. Nous sommes rassemblés à Genève aujourd'hui pour trouver des solutions aux besoins immédiats du peuple afghan, pour permettre aux Afghanes et aux Afghans de faire un premier pas en vue d'atteindre le sommet dont je parlais au début. À vous tous et toutes, une cordiale bienvenue en Suisse et en particulier à Genève. Merci pour votre attention.
Mr. Cassis, and we would like to very much try to get our Secretary-General of CARE International on the line. I understand she is connected. Ms. Zanaro, could you try to come and deliver your remarks? Okay. It seems that we're having still some problems with the connection. Apologies. We will try to come back to her later in the conference. It's now my pleasure to introduce the State Minister for Foreign Affairs of Qatar, His Excellency Sultan bin Saad Al Maraka. He's joining us virtually from Qatar. His Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. سعادة السيد أنطونيو غوتيريش الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة، أصحاب السعادة السيدات والسادة، يسرني في البداية أن أتوجه بالشكر إلى سعادة الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة على هذه الدعوة وما يقوم به من توجيه جهود الأمم المتحدة للتصدي للأوضاع الإنسانية في أفغانستان، وأن أؤكد التزام دولة قطر بمواصلة التعاون والتنسيق الوثيق القائم مع الأمم المتحدة في هذا الشأن. أصحاب السعادة، أن التحديات الإنسانية والتنموية التي عانى منها الشعب الأفغاني طويلاً والتي تفاقمت لا سيما في ظل التهديدات التي تمثلها جائحة فيروس كورونا والجفاف تتطلب كل الدعم الممكن من قبل المجتمع الدولي من أجل مساعدة الأفغان على مواجهة هذه الأوضاع الصعبة. وتكريس ما أحرزوه من تقدم على مختلف الأصعدة والحفاظ على حقوق جميع أبناء الشعب الأفغاني. وإدراكا من دولة قطر أن تحقيق السلام الشامل المستدام هو العامل الأساسي في تحسين الأوضاع الإنسانية، فقد بذلت جهود دؤوبة وناجحة خلال السنوات الماضية بهدف دعم التوصل إلى هذا الهدف المنشود. وفي ظل المستجدات الأخيرة واصلت دولة قطر التزامها كشريك دولي لأفغانستان والبناء على وساطتها النزيهة وعلاقاتها الدولية الفاعلة لتعزيز التوافق الدولي حول أفغانستان لتحقيق مصلحة شعبه الشقيق. واستضافت الدوحة العديد من الحلفاء والأصدقاء الدوليين والقيادات الأفغانية، وتمت اتصالات ومشاورات مكثفة معهم لتحقيق الاستقرار في أفغانستان ومعالجة القضايا الإنسانية. وفي هذا السياق نؤكد على أهمية توحيد الجهود من أجل حماية المدنيين وتوفير ممرات آمنة وحرية التنقل ووصول المساعدات الإنسانية، ومن الضروري تحقيق المصالحة الوطنية والحفاظ على المكتسبات التي حققها الشعب الأفغاني علاوة على ضمان مكافحة الإرهاب، وألا تكون أفغانستان في المستقبل عاملا في عدم استقرار المنطقة. أصحاب السعادة والسيدات والسادة، انطلاقا من الواجب الإنساني لدولة قطر، فقد سارعت خلال الشهر المنصرم إلى دعم إجلاء الحالات الإنسانية لعشرات الآلاف من الرعايا الأجانب والأفغان، كما وفرت المسكن المؤقت والوجبات الغذائية والرعاية الصحية ولقاحات كوفيد-19. كما أرسلت دولة قطر فرقا فنية مختصة للعمل في إصلاحات جزئية لمطار كابول بهدف إتاحة وصول المعونة الإنسانية الحيوية وحركة الأشخاص، إضافة إلى العمل على إنشاء ممرات آمنة لإيصال المساعدات العاجلة. كما دعمت توزيع المساعدات الإنسانية الحيوية والإمدادات الطبية من قبل الأمم المتحدة، وكذلك برامج التعليم الابتدائي. وفي إطار تقديم العون الإنساني العاجل، قدمت دولة قطر السبت الماضي ما يقارب 128 طنا من المواد الغذائية والطبية العاجلة، وسوف تصل المساهمات المالية ومساعدات دولة قطر لدعم أفغانستان إلى مبلغ وقدره 50 مليون دولار أمريكي. ختاما، أجدد تأكيد دولة قطر على تضامنها التام مع الشعب الأفغاني ودعمها المستمر له حتى يحقق مطالبه المشروعة في الاستقرار والأمن والسلامة والتنمية. وشكرا.
Thank you very much to the State Minister for Foreign Affairs of Qatar for your statement and for your support. I'd next like to ask the Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs of Germany, Mr. Heiko Maas, to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Secretary-General, Under-Secretary-General, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Together, we must send a clear message. We will continue and step up humanitarian support for Afghanistan, and we stand in solidarity with the countries affected by the Afghan crisis, particularly Pakistan, Iran, and the Central Asian republics. Yeah. Germany has already increased its humanitarian funding to Afghanistan and the region by 100 million euro. And we intend to provide another 500 million euro to help Afghanistan and its neighboring countries, also through the humanitarian flash appeal. In the European Union, we are working on a European compact with Afghanistan neighbors to strengthen resilience and neighboring countries. And we look forward to coordinating such steps with the efforts of the broader international community and the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, humanitarian assistance needs access. We therefore urge the Taliban leadership to guarantee the safety and security of humanitarian agencies and their personnel in Afghanistan. Beyond humanitarian aid, our future engagement with the Taliban government will be determined not by its words, but by its actions. We expect people for whom we are responsible to be able to leave the country. The Taliban have to respect basic human rights, and Afghanistan must never again become a place from where terrorism threatens the world. The formation last week of an interim government excluding other groups was not the right signal needed for international cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, the Afghan people need our support. I sincerely thank the United Nations and all other humanitarian organizations currently on the ground in Afghanistan. And their humanitarian workers are displaying immense courage, and we should join hands to give them the means they need. Thank you.
Very much for your statement, Foreign Minister Mas. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor to the High Commissioner for Refugees, UN High Commissioner for Refugees, who is speaking to us from Kabul today, Mr. Filippo Grandi.
Can you hear me, Melissa? Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Secretary-General, ministers, colleagues, as Melissa mentioned, I speak to you from Afghanistan. I have come here this morning to express solidarity with the Afghan people and support to United Nations and NGO colleagues that, as I have already seen, not only are staying, but also delivering and building, of course, in what Martin Griffiths reported about his own visit last week. I will be staying here 2 days and then going to Mazar-i-Sharif before leaving the country. Much focus in the last few weeks has been put on evacuating people from Afghanistan. Now is the time to pay urgent attention to the dramatic situation inside the country that has already been described. Afghans, as we all know, are masters at coping mechanisms, but today those coping mechanisms are stretched to the breaking point. And looking at it from the UNHCR perspective, the displacement angle, the human displacement angle, which is already dramatic, 3.5 million internally displaced people, of whom 500,000 recent ones. If you look at it from the perspective of the current crisis, I fear that the collapse of services and of the economy that has already been described as a risk, coupled perhaps with increased violence and tension, could lead to a much greater displacement, internal and external, and this may happen very soon. I have 3 concluding messages today. First, prevent this collapse from happening. I appreciate the many political complexity, but let's start with fully funded humanitarian appeals, and then urgently address the more complex development and financial issues. Humanitarian action, it's already clear after a few hours here, is possible. There are security risks, but also perhaps more security, opportunity, and space than in recent months and years. And humanitarian action, as I have already experienced in my interaction with the Taliban leaders, will undoubtedly open space for dialogue on more complex issues: human rights, the rights of women, women at work, education of girls, rights of minorities. If funds are given to us now and to humanitarian actors, we will scale up the response, and from the displacement perspective, this is particularly important ahead of winter. The second message, I reiterate what Martin already said, funding has to be flexible. And it is particularly true in terms of displacement. we must be responsive as the situation changes. We may see new displacement. We may see people returning home. We've seen already about 100,000 displaced people return to their areas of origin. So don't put us in an operational straitjacket through non-flexible funding so that we can help Afghans wherever they are and stabilize population flows. And finally, don't forget the refugee dimension. Don't forget millions of Afghan refugees, unregistered Afghans, and their hosts, especially in Iran, in Pakistan, but also in Turkey, where I was just a few days ago. Of course, should new flows unfortunately occur, I will appeal to all countries to exercise generous hospitality for people seeking asylum. But irrespective of population flows, of new flows, it is important to give help to existing refugees. This is why, in addition to the 600 million appeal being launched today, we have launched a few days ago a 300 million humanitarian appeal for neighboring countries. And this means funding, means vaccines, especially in Iran, means more resettlement places. Finally, I want to reiterate my call to all states to halt deportations of Afghans at this crucial time. And should any of them knock at your doors, show the humanity and solidarity that people in need of protection need at this very difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Filippo Grandi, especially for joining us in Kabul and from Kabul with those insights and those appeals. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor to the Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs and First Secretary of State, His Excellency Right Honorable Dominique Raab from the United Kingdom. Also joining us virtually, so hopefully the connection will come through in a matter of seconds.
Can you hear me, Madam Under Secretary General? Very good. Mr. Secretary General, Madam Under Secretary General, Your Excellencies, thank you very much for convening this important meeting, for shining a spotlight on the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. We share the assessment that we've heard, the concern about the very serious crisis facing Afghans today. And if the economy and basic services collapse, there is a real risk of a downward spiral with a knock-on set of implications for the region. And we see a tragic overlap between our moral interest, but also our strategic interest in preserving regional stability. Can I pay tribute to the many agencies, UN and NGOs that are operating in very difficult conditions? I should say we will not give aid directly to the Taliban, and therefore it's going to be absolutely crucial that aid agencies are able to operate securely and freely in Afghanistan. And we are calling on the Taliban and using what engagement we have and what leverage we have to call on the Taliban to follow through on their promises to allow those humanitarian agencies to operate in a secure environment, to respect international humanitarian law. And of course, we're very mindful that in many parts of Afghanistan, it is only women who have access to and can deliver some of the critical services that benefit women and girls. I think I would also say beyond the requirement for safe passage, I think we will also want to press the Taliban to make sure that Afghanistan is not used as a safe haven for terrorism, and that we do not see some of the previous systematic abuses of human rights we've seen in the past. We very much welcome the aim to deliver a shared approach to delivering aid for those most in need, and we welcome the UN's leadership in trying to define some common principles for operating. For the UK's part, we will step up to the plate. I can tell the conference that we are doubling our aid for Afghanistan this year to £286 million. in the pursuit of our humanitarian objectives, but also the regional stability that I mentioned and our wider strategic priorities for a safe, secure Afghanistan. That will include £30 million for Iran's neighbours, and we're obviously thinking of the pressure that they will face from the potential exodus that we fear from Afghanistan. Given the fragility of the health, the education services, the social fabric in Afghanistan, it may well be that the aid and the humanitarian lifelines will not alone be sufficient. And therefore, it'll be important to watch very carefully the actions of the Taliban in enabling the delivery of humanitarian aid as we consider what further actions that we can provide beyond the immediate crisis assistance that the UK will certainly be looking to support. And I think as well as making sure we rally together with a generous and needs-based offer, and we all come together to provide that, it will be very important to test and to gauge how the Taliban acts in terms of providing a constructive engagement within which the humanitarian effort can be pursued. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure now to turn the floor to the representative of the United States, the permanent representative of the United States of America to the United Nations in New York, Her Excellency Ms. Linda Thomas Greenfield.
Thank you very much. And let me start by thanking Secretary-General Guterres for convening this important meeting on the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. As we've all heard in detail, the situation is dire. UNICEF predicts that 1 million children under the age of 5 may soon face severe acute malnutrition. 1 million. One child dying of preventable hunger is too many. 1 million is unthinkable. One child dying of preventable hunger, I repeat again, is too many. Even before the recent transition, over 18 million people, almost half the population of Afghanistan, were in desperate need of humanitarian assistance. Now, at this moment, where assistance is even harder to come by, and women and girls are under particular threat, the need is even greater still. Let me state unequivocally that the United States is committed to providing humanitarian assistance and supporting the Afghan people. So today I'm proud to announce that the United States is providing nearly $64 million in new humanitarian assistance. This new funding will support the work of the United Nations, including the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and World Health Organization, as well as international NGO actors. This funding will help provide life-saving food assistance. It will meet critical health and nutrition needs. It will address the protection concerns of women, children, and people who belong to ethnic minority and other religious groups. And it will help more children, including girls, go back to school. And it will provide clean, potable water. This additional funding means the United States has provided nearly $330 million in assistance to Afghans in this fiscal year. And we are continuing to assess needs on the ground and plan to provide additional assistance for Afghans in the coming months. Today, we urge other countries to show solidarity. The Afghan people need our support for the Consolidated Flash Appeal and the Humanitarian Response Plan announced today. A drought is taking hold of the nation and a harsh winter approaches. Supplies must be moved to where they are needed now. Millions of Afghans are relying on our support to survive. Of course, given the transition taking place in the country, this funding alone is not enough to support the Afghan people and the efforts of the UN and our NGO partners. We need safe passage and the freedom of movement. We need access by air and on the ground. We need cooperation from neighboring countries to ensure the border remains open to commercial traffic. And we need to surge experienced aid workers to facilitate this life-saving aid. We need oral and written commitments made by the Taliban about operating rights of humanitarian agencies and the treatment and rights of minority groups, women and girls, to be upheld. Words are not good enough. We must see action. The international community is unified in this message. Humanitarian aid agencies cannot do their job if the Taliban does not uphold those core commitments and humanitarian principles. Finally, as we do this important work, we need to ensure humanitarian principles and norms are respected and protected. We cannot compromise on these values. That means all aid operations need to be independently monitored, reported on, and secured. And it means the international community needs to come together to ensure that both foreign and Afghan aid workers, neutral actors just trying to save lives, are able to do their jobs. We have all heard the reports that the Taliban are obstructing and interfering in aid delivery and protection efforts, prohibiting female staff from saving lives, and even exacting retribution against people benefiting from aid or providing it. That is frightening and unacceptable and frankly destabilizing to Afghanistan and to the region. It cannot continue. Humanitarian workers represent the best of us. They deserve our protection, and they should be allowed to do their life-saving work safely and securely without exception. Let me take this moment for the United States to thank them for their commitment and for their service. This is a moment for the international community to unite. Let us commit today to meeting this urgent appeal for financial support. Commit to standing by humanitarian workers as they do their all-important work, and to stepping up humanitarian action in Afghanistan so that we can save the lives of Afghans in need. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Thomas Greenfield. I am told that the connection now works for the Secretary-General of CARE International, Ms. Sofia Sprechmann-Cenero. Could you please tune in?
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished colleagues. I thank Secretary-General Guterres for inviting me to share a brief message at this crucial meeting. Let me start by sharing a quote from CARE's Deputy Country Director in Afghanistan, Marianne O'Grady. By the time the hot Afghanistan sun has peeked over the horizon each morning, families have already contemplated tough questions. How will we access food today? Will there be water to drink? Where will we sleep tonight? What does tomorrow hold? CARE, together with our international peers, have been operating in Afghanistan for many decades in close partnership with Afghan civil society organizations. Collectively, we have over 30,000 dedicated male and female staff delivering assistance across all sectors and in all provinces of the country. With a long history of working side by side with communities from both urban cities to hard-to-reach rural areas, we have not only built the collective experience, agility, and dedication to continue aid programming and scale it up, but also the local networks, partnerships, and community acceptance that is so critical for us to do so. So, while this current situation may seem complex and operationally challenging, it is not new for NGOs. What is new is the scale of needs. Afghanistan is suffering one of its worst ever droughts, with 1 in 3 Afghans now facing crisis level of food insecurity, rising inflation, and a struggling health, education, and social support system. Afghans are being dealt blow after blow. The COVID-19 pandemic and the approaching winter brings yet more complexity to an already exhausted population, within which women and children are particularly affected. To member states and our UN partners present today, I want to emphasize 3 key areas that must be addressed if we are to effectively meet these needs at scale. First, fund the appeal and fast-track flexible funding to humanitarian partners, including directly to NGOs. This will enable us to scale up our response to the hunger, health, protection, and displacement needs while putting in place urgent winterization activities. While the situation is complex, NGOs can respond to it, but only if the needed funding is urgently and rapidly availed by donors. Second, ensure funding is available to support sector-wide interventions that are responsive to gender, age, and disability. Such funding must include targeted interventions that address the specific needs of women and girls. Finally, standing in solidarity with all Afghan citizens, as is our collective objective today, requires securing the right enabling environment to ensure safe, rapid, and unimpeded access for humanitarian workers and relief items. Gender-balanced, diverse humanitarian teams are essential to the delivery of quality, culturally sensitive, and principled aid that meets the needs of the most vulnerable Afghans in all their diversity. Afghanistan is another test to the humanitarian community, but it is the job and purpose of all of us in this room, near and far, to rise to the challenge of supporting a country facing several simultaneous crises. I urge that now is not the time for empty words and rhetoric. To stand in true solidarity with Afghans, they need our concrete action now more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your powerful statement, and I'm very glad you were able to connect. It is now my pleasure to hand the floor to the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Pakistan, His Excellency Mr. Makhdoom Shah Mahmood Qureshi.
Secretary-General Guterres, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan welcomes and appreciates the efforts of the United Nations to provide much-needed humanitarian assistance to the people of Afghanistan. Today's Afghanistan represents an important opportunity as it begins its journey towards sustainable peace and development. The recurring cycles of conflict and instability during the last 4 decades can finally be stopped. The challenges are daunting. The situation is becoming dire for around 18 million people of Afghanistan who are directly in need of humanitarian assistance. A sluggish response from the international community can cause grave humanitarian consequences. Solidarity must be shown with the Afghan people at this pivotal juncture, both in terms of financial and political support. It is time to renew developmental partnerships, support nation building, and meet the humanitarian needs of the Afghan population. Durable solutions require scaling up of developmental interventions, provision of livelihood opportunities, and ensuring of access to basic necessities such as food, health, education for the Afghan people. Whilst we focus on the humanitarian situation inside Afghanistan, we must not forget millions of Afghans in large refugees hosting countries, from whom international support has dwindled over the years. In line with the principle of international responsibility and burden sharing, host communities must be supported, especially during these challenging times of COVID-19. Excellencies, on its part, Pakistan has been supporting the humanitarian efforts in Afghanistan in several ways, including by facilitating the evacuation and relocation of international staff and establishment of a humanitarian corridor for the delivery of relief goods through air and land routes. We are already airlifting humanitarian assistance comprising food and medicines to Afghanistan, which will be followed by supplies through land routes as well. Pakistan continues to host more than 3 million Afghan refugees for over 4 decades. Over the years, we have also earmarked over $1 billion for a range of development projects in Afghanistan. We reaffirm our commitment today to support the provision of humanitarian relief to the Afghan people under UN umbrella, as well as the continuity of our in-kind assistance to Afghanistan. We will also continue to facilitate the UN in its humanitarian relief efforts by providing logistical and other support through Pakistan. Excellencies, ensuring sustainable development and promoting respect for human rights require political stability and peace in Afghanistan. And peace cannot be consolidated unless Afghanistan is provided the necessary economic and fiscal space. Past mistakes must not be repeated. The Afghan people must not be abandoned. It is essential to take a long-term view and adopt a pragmatic approach. Sustained engagement with Afghanistan, especially for meeting its humanitarian needs, is indispensable. Pakistan appreciates the leadership shown by the UN Secretary-General on this account, and the UN agencies playing a leading role in ensuring humanitarian supplies. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. It is my pleasure now to invite the Executive Director of the World Food Programme, David Beasley, to join us virtually. Mr. Beasley, the floor is yours.
It's a pleasure to be with you, and I certainly wish we didn't have to have this meeting today, but things are as they are in the humanitarian world. We're responding. It was good to see Filippo on the ground, Martin Griffiths, who just came back. I was in the region 2 weeks ago, making certain that our UNHCR operations were ready to go, and they are, as the Secretary-General alluded to. And so we're moving UNHCR operations to a level to make certain that we can move the supplies and medicines. In fact, we just moved some medicines in for our WHO, substantial cargo just in the last few days. And so our trucks are operating, moving fairly smoothly throughout the regions and all throughout Afghanistan. But as the Secretary-General was very clear about, and all the speakers before, is that 14 million people, 1 out of 3, are marching to the brink of starvation. They don't know where their next meal is. And on top of that, you have 14 million people in what we call IPC level 2 that's knocking on that same door. So if we're not very careful, we could truly enter into the abyss in catastrophic conditions worse than what we see now. In fact, 3 out of 4 people in Afghanistan are already engaged in coping capacity, because what you're seeing is back-to-back drought, years of conflict, COVID, economic deterioration, lack of cash. In fact, 40% of the wheat crop this year has been lost. And I could just keep going on and on and on. The cooking oil, for example, has doubled just recently. All of these things together are just making really a bad situation for all the people in Afghanistan. We need $200 million, additional $200 million just in the next 6 months to reach the people that we need to reach. In fact, we need to reach now about 14 million. We're reaching 7 million now. Our operations have been ongoing and are continuing to move throughout the land. But now we've got to step up because we're in the lean season, as well as the deterioration that I was referring to. Now, here's what I'm extremely concerned about as well. We have 4 million people that are in a very, very difficult area to reach when the winter season hits us in a couple of months. And if we don't get the money to pre-position that food in those areas, you will have catastrophe in those areas more immediately. So my friends, my donors who've been stepping up. The time is now. We cannot wait 6 months. We need the funds immediately so we can move the supplies to pre-position to accommodate the innocent people of Afghanistan. We cannot turn our back on the people of Afghanistan. We have 467 employees. They're putting their lives on the line every day, doing their best to make certain that people don't suffer. We are working with all the authorities necessary to get not just the access we need to make sure that hopefully and make certain that all of our women can continue to work all throughout the land. And at the same time, we want to continue to push school meals so that little girls and little boys get healthy school meals. Because as the Secretary-General and others alluded to, we're looking at a crisis for children throughout the land. When you understand that 40% of the GDP from the country comes from foreign aid and 75% of the public spending is from international funding, you begin to see that while our crisis now is great, if we're not careful, if we completely withdraw international support and are not strategic, we could have mass migration, destabilization in the region, and for certain starvation among millions of Afghan people. So we've got a lot of work to do. I'll be back in the region, I hope, in a couple of weeks. Our teams will continue to collaborate and work together in the UN and the NGO sector. It will be pushing the limit to make certain that we reach every single person possible so that not a single Afghan person suffers. And so please step up now so that we can do our job. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beasley, for your appeal to avert hunger. It is now my pleasure to welcome the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Turkey, Mr. Mevlut Cavusoglu. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, let me also start by thanking the Secretary-General for organizing this meeting at this critical moment. We will continue to monitor the full implications of the recent transition of power in Afghanistan. We should act collectively to help the Afghan people and manage the crisis. But now our priority should be on the humanitarian front. We all heard the alarming figures. A third of the Afghan people are faced with hunger. Nearly half of the population are in need of urgent humanitarian aid. The signs of growing economic crisis are everywhere and flashing red. Dear colleagues, since the 1920s, Turkey has contributed to the stabilization and development efforts in Afghanistan, including the education of girls and empowerment of women. We provide humanitarian aid today through the Turkish Red Crescent. And we will continue our support as conditions on the ground get better. Our embassy in Kabul is operational, and my colleagues are working on the humanitarian files. Certainly, we need collective action. We support the Secretary-General's call to mobilize an effective response. The precondition for this is security. Humanitarian aid agencies should be able to operate safely and have smooth access those in need. And we hope that the current authority in Afghanistan will do its part. Another vital component for any relief effort is the functioning of Kabul airport. As we have done for the last 6 years, we are ready to offer our experience and expertise in cooperation with Qatar to keep the airport operational. Dear friends, dear colleagues, at the same time, we have to be realistic and keep a long-term perspective. Any sustainable solution requires functioning state institutions. We note the recently announced caretaker government. The Taliban stated that this is a transitional government. We hope for a genuinely inclusive one representing all segments of the society. Dear Secretary-General, delivering humanitarian aid to the Afghan people is a moral duty. And the physical distance between our nations and Afghanistan shouldn't mislead us. A humanitarian and security crisis in Afghanistan will have direct implications across the globe. So we should take the collective action now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Turkey. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Minister for Foreign Affairs of France, Jean-Yves Le Drian.
Général adjoint aux affaires humanitaires, chère Martine, mes chers collègues, l'Afghanistan se trouve aujourd'hui en état d'urgence humanitaire aux conséquences de la prise de pouvoir par la force par les talibans et du chaos qu'il a provoqué. S'ajoute, vous le savez, le fléau de la sécheresse et de la menace du Covid-19, si bien que près de la moitié de la population est désormais en danger, dont plus de 4 millions de femmes et près de 10 millions d'enfants. Notre responsabilité est d'être à leur côté dans cette nouvelle épreuve. La communauté internationale doit être au rendez-vous de la solidarité. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, d'avoir pris l'initiative de cette réunion de haut niveau. Le plan d'urgence que les Nations Unies viennent de publier fixe des priorités claires pour faire une vraie différence sur le terrain. C'est notre feuille de route. Pour réussir, nous devons donner aux acteurs humanitaires les moyens d'agir vite. La France contribuera à cet effort collectif en débloquant 100 millions d'euros pour faire face à l'urgence. Ces financements iront principalement aux agences et aux programmes des Nations Unies. Je pense tout particulièrement au commissariat aux réfugiés et au programme alimentaire mondial. Ces financements permettront de soutenir des actions menées directement en Afghanistan ou dans les pays de la région qui accueillent des réfugiés. Pour réussir, nous devons aussi veiller à ce que le droit international humanitaire soit respecté par tous, conformément à la résolution 2593 du Conseil de sécurité. Un plein accès humanitaire sûr, sans entrave, doit être assuré. Il est en effet crucial que l'ensemble de la population, je pense en particulier aux femmes et aux filles, puisse bénéficier de l'aide humanitaire. Et par ailleurs, rien ne doit faire obstacle au travail des personnels humanitaires féminins. Quant à la sécurité des personnels humanitaires et médicaux, c'est un impératif absolu sur lequel il ne faut pas transiger. Je tiens à rendre hommage aux agences et aux programmes humanitaires des Nations Unies, au Comité international de la Croix-Rouge et à l'ensemble des acteurs humanitaires mobilisés pour aider le peuple afghan et à vous assurer que vous pouvez compter sur le soutien de la France. Je saisis enfin cette opportunité pour remercier les autorités qatariennes avec lesquelles nous nous coordonnons étroitement dans le contexte de la crise afghane. Je m'exprime d'ailleurs devant vous depuis Doha. Je tiens aussi à remercier les autorités émiriennes avec lesquelles la coopération a toujours été aussi constante. Merci de votre attention.
Thank you very much for the Minister of Foreign Affairs of France. It's now my pleasure to introduce His Excellency Janusz Lenarczyk, the EU Commissioner for Crisis Management.
Thank you very much, Secretary-General Guterres, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for organizing this timely event. We all know the difficult situation in Afghanistan and even more dire prospects. We are all aware of the urgency to act without delay. The flash appeal correctly outlines the massive humanitarian needs in Afghanistan, being aggravated by an imminent economic meltdown. This has to be mitigated by humanitarian assistance as an urgent, immediate response. Indeed, with development aid frozen, we, the international community, have to stand by the Afghan population and do all in our power to prevent many avoidable deaths and the breakdown of basic services. The European Union remains firmly determined to help the people of Afghanistan. We are committed to continue with our assistance and to further strengthen it. This is why the EU recently pledged a humanitarian package of over 200 million euros of emergency support for the most vulnerable in Afghanistan, as well as to the Afghan refugees and their host countries and communities in the wider region. Inside Afghanistan, our priority will be given to healthcare, nutrition, food security, and support to newly displaced populations, as well as shelter, water and sanitation, and preparing for the upcoming winter. Logistical support in the form of a humanitarian air bridge is crucial. Very importantly, our response will furthermore seek to address critical protection and educational needs, notably for women and girls. Unimpeded access for both male and female aid workers and the safety and security of all humanitarian operators will need to be ensured. And it goes without saying, all humanitarian operations in Afghanistan will need to continue as before, fully in line with the fundamental principles of humanitarian aid. The unified messages to this effect need to be passed to the Taliban and humanitarian principles respected by them. A strong political commitment in support of the people of Afghanistan is required by all countries, donors, and international partners around the world. My colleagues from the European Union member states are here today to demonstrate the strong commitment we all have. The EU will continue to promote a coordinated collective response to the crisis in Afghanistan, including through the Solutions Strategy for Afghan Refugees Support Platform, which the EU is chairing this year. In this context, we are in dialogue both with Afghanistan's neighbors, Pakistan and Iran in particular, as well as with other donors on the immediate priorities in the current situation. We must act now to not fail the Afghan people at this critical time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lenarčič. It's my pleasure now to welcome Henrietta Fore, the Executive Director of UNICEF.
Secretary-General, thank you very much, Under-Secretary-General, distinguished ministers and colleagues. Let me speak of children. Children in Afghanistan have long suffered disproportionately from the humanitarian, security, social, and economic crises that have plagued the country for decades. Their suffering is far from over, and they need our help. Nearly 10 million girls and boys depend on humanitarian assistance just to survive. At least 1 million children suffer from severe acute malnutrition this year and could die without treatment. Nearly 600,000 people, more than half of whom are children, have been displaced due to conflict this year. The number of unaccompanied and separated children is increasing, and we have received informal reports of the recruitment of children by parties to the conflict and are concerned that children may be at heightened risk of experiencing other grave violations of their rights. Without urgent action, the grim situation facing Afghanistan's children is likely to deteriorate over the coming months because of the severe drought and water scarcity, the concerns around financing for the continuity of basic services, the onset of winter, and the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. That is why we are here today, as Filippo Grandi has just said, to urge the international community to increase support for the UN humanitarian agencies and our partners, so we can maintain and expand life-saving and other critical programs for children and families in need. A robust humanitarian response is necessary to protect important development gains that have been made in the recent years, while also planting the seeds for longer-term stability. For example, the number of schools in Afghanistan has tripled since 2002, and school enrollment has increased tenfold over the past 20 years, reaching almost 10 million children today, including nearly 4 million girls. These are important improvements that we cannot lose for the country's children, and upon which we must keep building, because there is far more room to grow. Over 4.2 million children remain out of school, and according to our most recent data, nearly 50% of the girls in Afghanistan have never even entered primary school. And this needs to change. Protecting and advancing the rights of women and girls are central features of the humanitarian and development continuum. We will continue to press for and closely monitor girls' and women's safety and access to essential services, as well as the ability of female teachers and health workers to return to work. UNICEF has been on the ground in Afghanistan for more than 70 years, working across the country to provide a wide range of critical humanitarian and development interventions. We know what needs to be done for children, and we can get it done, together with our partners, so long as we have full funding, support, transportation of supplies and staff, and full humanitarian access to safely reach those in need. We need to ensure that aid is not politicized. Prioritization of funding decisions should be based on needs first. We must look for ways to deliver timely and sustained assistance at scale. These efforts will continue expanding and including the expansion in our programs to provide more children, women, and families with access to healthcare, nutrition support, protection, shelter, education, water, and sanitation. And we are actively exploring options to keep essential services afloat through an all-of-organization effort, humanitarian and development, lives and livelihoods. We are already seeing results. In the last 2 weeks, we have provided 170,000 people affected by the drought with safe drinking water and deployed mobile health teams in 14 provinces to continue delivering basic health services for children and women. During the last week of August, UNICEF provided 4,000 children, severely malnourished children under 5, with life-saving therapeutic treatment. And as part begun, as we speak, UNICEF has at least 2 road missions on the ground in Afghanistan. As the Secretary-General said, none of this work would be possible without the dedication of our frontline workers on the ground, especially our national staff. They remain committed to serving children, often at great risk to their own lives, and we owe them a huge debt of gratitude and will do everything in our power to guarantee their safety and protection. So let me echo the earlier comments. Please help us, all of us who are the humanitarians who are working on the ground. There has never been a more urgent time to stand with the children of Afghanistan and the people who serve them. Without your support, essential services will come to a grinding halt and the country will slip further into chaos. We as the world cannot let that happen again. Thank you very much. Back to you, Melissa.
Thank you very much, Henrietta, for speaking for the children of Afghanistan. It is now my pleasure to welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Norway, Ms. Ina Eriksen Søreide. You have the floor.
Excellencies, Secretary-General, Undersecretary-General, thank you so much for convening and organizing this very timely meeting. It's imperative right now that we be united in our approach towards the Taliban. UN leadership, of course, is key, and also the rest of the world must have unanimous voices towards the Taliban. This is not the time for competing messages or lack of coordination, and we need to be clear and unequivocal in our communication with the Taliban about their responsibility to respect international humanitarian law and human rights. We've seen the reports during the last few days about women taking to the streets to assert their rights of inclusion, freedom of expression, participation, and peaceful protest, and we have to support them as the international community. There are many issues I could have talked about today when it comes to, for instance, the right of education beyond primary school, but I will focus on the humanitarian issues during my intervention. Firstly, women's participation in society is crucial. Women are, as we know, breadwinners, and millions of Afghan families depend on the income of women to survive. And unless the knowledge and leadership of Afghan women are used to the full, both the humanitarian response and the long-term development efforts will fail. Secondly, safe and unimpeded access must be granted for all humanitarian workers, men and women, to enable them to provide impartial humanitarian assistance to affected communities across Afghanistan. My third point is that humanitarian assistance must be provided solely on the basis of needs without any form of discrimination on grounds of gender, ethnicity, religious belief, location, or any other factor. And my last point is that we have to look beyond the immediate humanitarian needs and to ensure a broader and more long-term approach, because we all know that humanitarian assistance alone cannot compensate for the discontinuation of development initiatives. So it's of paramount importance to find the longer-term solutions that can safeguard development gains and also prevent a total collapse of delivery of basic services to the Afghan people. Norway is today pledging an additional 100 million Norwegian kroner, approximately $11.5 million US, in additional support to humanitarian organizations in Afghanistan in order to meet the enormous humanitarian needs now present in the country. And of course, this comes in addition to the 161 million Norwegian kroner, which amounts to $19 million US in humanitarian assistance already allocated, which includes support to neighboring countries receiving Afghan refugees. We have also in this fiscal year had a very strong increase in the core funding of UNHCR and WFP, with respectively 80% and 166% increase. My final point is to pay tribute to all the humanitarian aid workers who are now working on the ground, trying to provide basic needs and services and save lives and relieve suffering of all of those Afghan people who are now in dire needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. It is now my pleasure to welcome the External Affairs Minister of India, His Excellency Dr. Subramaniam Jai Hankar. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. Secretary-General, Excellencies, at the outset, I thank the Secretary-General for convening this timely and important meeting on the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. India has consistently supported a central role of the United Nations on its future. A multilateral platform is always more effective than small groups in building global consensus and encouraging united action. We therefore believe that the UN Security Council Resolution 2593 should guide the international community's approach in the coming days. Afghanistan is passing through a critical and challenging phase. There has been a sea change in its political, economic, social, and security situation, and consequently in its humanitarian needs. As an immediate neighbor, India is monitoring developments with understandable concern. Mr. Secretary-General, the UNDP has recently assessed that there is an imminent threat of poverty levels rising from 72 to 97% in that country. This would have catastrophic consequences, not just in our collective fight against poverty, but also for regional stability. Even as we address that, it is important that the issue of travel and safe passage that can emerge as an obstacle to humanitarian assistance be immediately sorted out. Those who wish to travel into and out of Afghanistan should be granted such facilities without obstruction. The normalization of regular commercial operations of Kabul airport would not only assist in that regard, but then become the basis for a regular flow of relief material. This would also accelerate activities that would complement domestic relief measures. India's own approach to Afghanistan has always been guided by its historical friendship with its people. This will continue to be the case. For that reason, even in the past, we have contributed to the humanitarian requirements of that society. This included providing more than 1 million metric tons of wheat to Afghanistan over the past decade. Last year, too, we have assisted Afghanistan with 75,000 metric tons of wheat. India had also partnered World Food Programme for distribution of high-protein biscuits over several years. This innovative scheme particularly supported vulnerable school-going children of Afghanistan. Mr. Secretary General, India's efforts in helping the Afghan people has been both direct and indirect. We have contributed to their livelihood and larger framework as significantly as we have to direct material needs. Our friendship is reflected in Indian development projects that today exist in all the 34 provinces. In all, we have invested more than $3 billion for the welfare of the people of Afghanistan. We have undertaken 500 projects in critical areas of power, water supply, road, connectivity, healthcare, education, agriculture, and capacity building. Today, I wish to underline that in the face of a grave emerging situation, India is willing to stand by the Afghan people, just as in the past. To ensure that this happens speedily and effectively, we believe that the international community must come together to create the best possible enabling environment. Among the challenges that the current situation poses is that of efficient logistics. It is therefore essential that humanitarian assistance providers are accorded unimpeded, unrestricted, and direct access to Afghanistan. Once relief materials reach that country, the world will naturally expect a non-discriminatory distribution of humanitarian assistance across all sections of the Afghan society. Only the United Nations has the capacity to monitor such endeavors and reassure donors. As the picture becomes clear in respect of these legitimate concerns, I am confident that the world will step forward and assist the Afghan people in their hour of need. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy, Mr. Luigi Di Maio.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Thank you, Excellencies, for convening this important conference. We share the serious concerns for the situation in Afghanistan and for the fate of the Afghan people. The appointment of the interim government in Kabul raises additional worries, while the humanitarian situation is already deteriorated by years of conflict, extreme climate events, and the COVID pandemic. Half of the population needs humanitarian assistance, basic services are collapsing, the risk of new migration flows is growing. The situation is likely to worsen with the approaching of the winter season. We are extremely worried for the most vulnerable groups such as women, children, victims of war, and IDPs. We need to act now also to prevent the economic collapse of the country. We have a moral duty not to turn our back to the Afghans, preserving the achievements of our 2-decade efforts to promote rights, inclusiveness, and development. The UN system has a crucial role. We have to monitor that international organizations and humanitarian actors are granted full, safe, and unconditional access to all areas in the country and to all those in need. We must pay a special attention to safeguarding the achievements in terms of rights, safety, and well-being of women and girls. Mr. Secretary-General, Excellencies, Italy has always supported the main humanitarian organizations in Afghanistan and their activities. We are planning to devote additional resources to humanitarian assistance both in Afghanistan and in neighboring countries for a total amount of 150 million euros. About half of these resources will be devoted to humanitarian activities in Afghanistan. Assistance to IDPs, support to food security and agriculture, health, education, and countering gender-based violence will be at the core of our action. We intend to support the Office of the Coordinator for Humanitarian Affairs, UNHCR, FAO, the World Food Programme, and UN Population Fund, and other partners, including civil society organizations. Funds will be convened also to assist neighboring countries hosting refugees fleeing Afghanistan. Mr. Secretary General, let me reaffirm Italy's commitment to play an active role in supporting the Afghan people, also in its capacity as current G20 presidency. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. We are on speaker number 17, and we have over 80 speakers. So may I make an appeal to all speakers to adhere to their 3-minute limit. It is now my pleasure to welcome the Minister for Development, Cooperation and Nordic Cooperation from Denmark, His Excellency Mr. Flemming Møller Mortensen.
Esteemed colleagues, thank you, Secretary-General, for calling this meeting. It comes at a crucial point in time. The humanitarian situation in Afghanistan is alarming, and the outlook is dire, as already stated by others here today. I commend the commitment by the UN and the humanitarian community. We must continue to stand by the people of Afghanistan in this hour. We must mobilize the necessary humanitarian response, not only for Afghanistan, but also in support of the neighboring countries that host large numbers of Afghans. Unhindered access to people at risk in respect of the humanitarian principles must be ensured. Female staff must be allowed to carry out humanitarian work. The international community must stand together in its unified messages to Taliban. In support of this, I am announcing today an additional humanitarian contribution of $38 million. This brings the total Danish humanitarian support to Afghanistan to $80 million since the start of this year. Also, the Danish private sector is stepping forward. Novo Nordisk Foundation and Lego Foundation have announced generous contributions. Denmark has, alongside many of you, maintained a steadfast commitment to Afghanistan for over 20 years now. Danish development and humanitarian support over the years amounts to more than $1.2 billion. Together, we have achieved important results. Child mortality has dropped to half. 9 million children have enrolled in schools, of which 40% were girls. The role of women in politics and in civil services increased considerably. The political context has now changed, but our solidarity with the Afghan people remains. The prospects for Afghan women and girls are particularly heartbreaking. We must support their dreams and aspirations. Denmark currently leads the call to action on protection from gender-based violence in emergencies to prevent, mitigate, and respond to gender-based violences in Afghanistan. More than ever, the people of Afghanistan need our united support. Thank you.
For your support and also for being so brief. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure now to introduce the State Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan, Mr. Eiichiro Washio. You have the floor, sir.
I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary-General of the United Nations, for the invitation. Japan is concerned that Afghanistan is facing a serious humanitarian crisis. The international community has to work together immediately to tackle it. From this viewpoint, we welcome the fresh appeal issued by the United Nations. In light of the growing humanitarian needs in Afghanistan and in its neighboring countries, Japan is prepared to provide a total of $200 million assistance this year, including $65 million in new assistance in such areas as shelter, health, water, sanitation, food, agriculture, and education through international organizations. Also, to respond quickly to the humanitarian crisis, we intend to pursue modification in the usage of the ongoing aid which has been already disbursed. We also think that it is important to link short-term assistance with mid to long-term nation-building process in Afghanistan. It is essential that we ensure the Afghans actually receive the assistance. In this regard, international organizations and NGOs play vital roles to ensure the safety and accessibility of aid workers. The Taliban has stated that it will not hinder the transportation of humanitarian goods and activities, but the international community should keep a close eye on Taliban's actual actions and work with one voice. Last week, the Taliban announced the formation of its tentative cabinet. However, it is hard to say that their prior commitments, such as inclusiveness and women's political participation, have been realized. Japan will continue to closely monitor Taliban's actual actions. In particular, we will strongly urge, first, to protect the lives and the property of all Afghans and restore the social order. Second, to safeguard and advance basic human rights, especially the rights of women and girls. And third, to build a country where inclusive political process, including diverse ethnic and religious groups, is guaranteed. Japan, in coordination with the countries concerned, will continuously urge the Taliban to ensure the safe passage and departure of remaining people relevant to our countries. We believe that the free entry and exit of Afghans is the key to the Afghanistan's stability and development. Since 2001, Japan, together with the international community, has been committed to Afghanistan's reconstruction. We hope our efforts over the past 20 years, such as significant improvements in school enrollment and literacy rate, as well as a decrease in the infant mortality, will serve as a foundation of Afghan's future nation building. Thank you very much for your attention.
Minister, and I'd like to now turn the floor to the President of the ICRC, Mr. Peter Maurer.
Thanks a lot, Secretary-General, dear colleagues. I have on my side just returned from Afghanistan, where I met the Taliban leadership and visited ICRC's humanitarian operations, which have continued largely uninterrupted despite events during the last couple of weeks. Across the country, the magnitude of need is evident, from social services to protection. Primary health care is on the brink of collapse, water services failing, food prices exorbitant. Afghans welcome the end of the fighting, yet they are deeply concerned for the future of diversity in a fragmented society, women and minority groups first and foremost. People also told me they felt betrayed by the international community's tunnel vision focus on their own nationals at Afghans' expense. They questioned the honesty and the neutrality of the aid that left with the international security forces in their hour of need. Let's not strengthen these voices by inaction. The risk of destabilizing the entire region is real. It is critical that we find extraordinary measures, even if temporary, to ensure continued and scaled humanitarian support and to repair the economic and financial system. A long period of limbo, where investment hinges on political recognition of the government, will only lead to an ever deeper humanitarian crisis. Colleagues, today I also sound a warning on conditional humanitarianism. Humanitarian action should not be conditional to political human rights or other stipulations. This is a dangerous pathway. It weakens respect for international humanitarian law and for humanitarian actors, and it erodes the principles of neutral, independent and impartial humanitarian action. Instead, humanitarian action can be the first step towards building trust, stability and compliance with more ambitious legal frameworks. Respect for diversity is conducive to humanitarian impact. It must not be a condition for humanitarian action. Colleagues, the ICRC continues to work in Afghanistan as we have for 30 years. We will stay the course and scale our work. With the Afghan Red Crescent, we will significantly increase the number of health structures we support. We will work to ensure the dignity of detained populations, to connect separated families across borders, including the immediate need to reunite children with their families. The ICRC anticipates needing 150 million Swiss francs through the year 2022, recognizing that our ability to deliver also depends on systems and structures continuing to function in country and on continued international support. I do not underestimate the difficulties of this situation and the compromises that may be needed, but I remain optimistic that solutions will be found. We do not have a choice. Too many lives hang in the balance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maurer, for your statement. I would now like to welcome the Minister for International Development Cooperation from Sweden, Mr. Per Olsen Fried.
Thank you, Melissa. Mr. Secretary-General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me thank the United Nations and the Secretary-General for convening this timely meeting. Winter is coming to Afghanistan. A winter following political and military turmoil, the end of an international operation and intervention, the return of the Taliban. The Afghan winter will be a time of grim survival. I hope today's meeting will be a strong message to the Afghan people that we, the international community, demonstrate our continued commitment and solidarity. The Afghan people have lived with conflict for over 40 years. They have lived with famine, droughts, poverty and insecurity, not knowing if your family will survive day by day and week by week. And now, for obvious reasons, the long-term development support has been halted. The new government presented is far from inclusive. But we must be able to respond to the increasingly acute humanitarian situation before the already dire situation becomes a complete catastrophe. Sweden welcomes and fully supports your decision, Mr. Secretary-General, to stay and deliver. The UN plays a critical role. How we, the peoples, decide to act will make a difference. Besides saving lives, we need to save livelihoods. For the women and girls, as well as the farmers, the teachers, the doctors, the brave journalists, the human rights activists and defenders, the progress made during the last 20 years must be sustained. Basic services, health services, education and livelihood maintained. A collapse of social services and the banking sector would worsen the crisis further. Therefore, it's vital that we find creative mechanisms for nexus support. And we, the donor community, need to support the UN agencies with a broader mandate and with flexible funding. Only then can the UN, in close coordination and partnership, find solutions that benefit the people on the ground, locally and regionally, outside of Kabul and the major cities. They need to survive the winter. Ensuring a decentralized response across the country will be key in order to reach the whole Afghan population. Only then can we properly assess the needs, monitor implementation and offer support in line with the humanitarian principles. And the protection and rights of women and girls must be an integral part of these efforts. And this also goes for minorities and people with intersecting vulnerabilities. Female and male humanitarian workers must be guaranteed safety and security. As always, They need full, unhindered access in all regions to carry out their work. International humanitarian law has to be respected and unquestioned. As a direct consequence of the developments in Afghanistan, the Swedish government has made additional humanitarian funding available for the response in Afghanistan. The Swedish International Development Agency, SIDA, has so far allocated an additional $8.1 million to the World Food Programme and the Afghanistan Humanitarian Fund, on top of the almost $22 million provided this year. We have also decided to release an additional $8.6 million in flexible funding to UNHCR that can be used in the response inside Afghanistan and the neighboring countries. And we will continue to follow closely the humanitarian and development needs of the Afghan people and respond accordingly. We have a long-standing relationship and engagement with Afghanistan, including through the Swedish Committee on Afghanistan, and our pledge reflects our steadfast support. Excellencies, for decades, winters have feared the Afghans. The regular power cuts, the roofs that collapse, the snow cutting of roads for months, and the children at risk dying from the cold. But they have also feared the spring, the fighting season. So let me end with a word of sincere recognition for all humanitarian and development workers, female and male, who work tirelessly throughout the country to deliver life-saving assistance to the people of Afghanistan every day under extremely challenging circumstances. I urge now all of us to be wise. Let us not make decisions tailored to please our opinions at home. Let us make decisions with a focus on what is best for the Afghan people. For far too long, they have suffered. Thank you very much.
It is my pleasure now to welcome the Executive Director of UNFPA, Dr. Natalia Kanem.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary-General, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, in Afghanistan, every 2 hours, a woman dies from pregnancy-related complications. Every 2 hours, a motherless child is born. As a humanitarian catastrophe looms, women and girls, as always, will pay a heavy price. UNFPA is part of the coordinated effort on the ground, working with partners to maintain functional, life-saving reproductive health and protection services, tending to women and girls in almost 200 family health houses and protection centers, and scaling up to meet new challenges, because Afghan women and girls must not be abandoned. My message today: we must stand strong and stand together to protect the fundamental rights, freedoms, and very lives of Afghan women and girls, and not allow 20 years of hard-won gains to be eroded before their eyes. Neither religious beliefs nor politics must ever be used to justify curtailment of women's full participation in all aspects of society. Afghan women and civil society fought hard to claim this right. Now more than ever, they need us in their corner. If a woman is in labor and needs an emergency cesarean delivery, or she's a victim of violence, she turns to UNFPA. Our priority is the over 4 million women and adolescent girls desperate for assistance now, who count on female health and humanitarian workers to meet their unique needs. There must be no restrictions on women's movements and involvement in humanitarian activities. The community-level service points UNFPA has operated for many years are mostly still open, still saving lives. That situation, however, remains fluid. As part of the Secretary-General's appeal, UNFPA seeks $29.2 million for essential services for women and girls. With your generous assistance, for example, UNFPA will reach 20,000 female-headed households with winterized dignity kits, including menstrual hygiene supplies. Without the funding, perhaps decades of investment and achievements in reducing maternal mortality will be lost. Thousands of mothers may die needless deaths, and thousands of women and girls may be exposed to all types of violence, with girls forced to abandon education and instead married off against their will. Desperately sought UNFPA family planning services could shrink by half, with millions of unintended pregnancies. Honorable ministers, distinguished delegates, to Afghanistan's women and girls, I affirm We shall stand by your side and deliver. Help us make good on this promise and fulfill their dreams of peace, dignity, and a decent future for themselves and coming generations. Thank you.
Yeah. It's my pleasure now to introduce the Foreign Minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Mr. Hussein Amir Abdullahian. Sir, you have the floor.
In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to give my appreciation for the opportunity that has been opened up so that the international community will be able to pay a closer attention to the most pressing challenge in our vicinity and region, that is the challenge in the neighborhood of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Afghanistan. As we speak, a new challenge has been erupting in Afghanistan, and we're all in it together. We are convinced that to find the prime culprit of the rampant instability, lack of development, havoc, and insecurity in today's Afghanistan, we don't need to look further than the United States of America and their haphazard and trial and error approach. In the years occupying Afghanistan, and even now, the Americans, with the withdrawal from this country, have engendered catastrophes, the scenes and footages of which we all were witness to in Kabul airport. We're of the conviction that the meeting today operates on two levels of political and humanitarian. On the political level, we need to collectively reinforce and echo this one message, that is, a safe, prosperous, and developed Afghanistan shall only and only be viable and possible in light of the establishment of a national, broad-based, all-inclusive government with the participation of all sides. The Islamic Republic of Iran keeps contacting all parties in Afghanistan. We pursue a policy in Afghanistan that warrants the establishment of a broad-based government, and at the same time we shall see an Afghanistan void of terrorism, void of narcotics, an Afghanistan whose situation creates sparks of hope in Afghan people, and Afghan people can decide about their future. We believe that on the humanitarian level, people, women and children in the past years, and particularly in the past weeks, have undergone catastrophic and calamitous situations. Today, it is incumbent on the international community to reach out to Afghanistan by delivering urgent and swift humanitarian aid delivery. The Islamic Republic of Iran stands ready to redirect and facilitate humanitarian aid of other countries to Afghanistan. We are one of the countries that have the longest common borders. In the very face of the unfair sanctions imposed on my own country by the United States and the West, my country has remained committed to delivering essential humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, and in a few hours our air cargo of humanitarian aid will be distributed to will be delivered to Afghanistan and distributed among Afghan people in order to prevent the influx of a new wave of migrants. We have kept all our border crossings open in favor of trade and the delivery of humanitarian assistance. And in this way, within our ken, we try to address the needs and necessities of Afghan people. Today, Iran is host to and supports some 4 million Afghan citizens. Of course, we need to criticize the international community because of their approach towards tending to the Afghan people. But we, despite the very complicated situation of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have tried to stand by Afghan citizens in Iran, and parallel with our own nationals, we are protecting this refugee population by vaccinating them against this ominous coronavirus. Allow me to take the opportunity and hereby press for the importance of urgent humanitarian assistance for the Afghan refugees as we wait for the establishment of a broad-based government. In conclusion, I would like to thank the UN Secretary-General and the UN OCHA for organizing this event.
Minister, before I give the floor to our next speaker, could I remind our distinguished delegates to please keep their statements to 3 minutes out of solidarity for all those who want to speak within our limited time frame today. Thank you very much. Now I would like to welcome the Minister of International Development of Canada, Her Excellency Ms. Karina Gould.
Great, thank you so much. Canada is deeply concerned about the deteriorating situation in Afghanistan, including the potential collapse of financial and social systems and the devastating impact this would have. While Afghans in all parts of the country are affected, women and girls are feeling the consequences of this humanitarian crisis the most. We must act urgently, and we need to act collectively. Canada welcomes the Afghanistan flash appeal, and we are committed to working closely with humanitarian partners to ensure that urgent needs are met. Recently, Canada announced $50 million toward the humanitarian response in Afghanistan and the region. This is in addition to more than $27 million in humanitarian assistance for Afghanistan already provided this year. Nous reconnaissons que la situation sur le terrain demeure fluide et que l'environnement opérationnel des acteurs humanitaires est extrêmement difficile et complexe. Le Canada salue les efforts inlassables déployés par les partenaires humanitaires pour apporter une aide urgente et vitale aux personnes touchées par cette crise. Il est essentiel de ne pas compromettre l'aide humanitaire et qu'elle demeure ainsi neutre, impartiale et indépendante. Nous appelons toutes les parties à respecter le droit humanitaire international et permettre un accès sans entrave aux populations civiles, en particulier les femmes et les filles. En agissant sur la base de ces principes, nous pouvons contribuer à nous assurer que les personnes qui ont besoin d'aide puissent le recevoir et que ceux qui fournissent cette aide puissent le faire en toute sécurité. In addition to the impact of the crisis inside Afghanistan, we also recognize the significant pressure being placed on refugee hosting countries and communities in the region. We commend the generosity of neighboring countries who offer safe haven to people fleeing violence and strongly encourage the countries of the region to keep their borders open. In line with the Global Compact on Refugees, Canada is committed to supporting these regional efforts and providing assistance to Afghan refugees and hosting communities. We are also committed to global responsibility sharing, and we look forward to welcoming 20,000 Afghan refugees to Canada. We encourage other countries to do the same. The people of Afghanistan must remain at the center of our humanitarian efforts. In our haste to act, we must not forget to listen to their priorities, their concerns, and ensure that they are an integral part of our collective response. The outpouring of solidarity and generosity by the international community here today speaks to a strong and unwavering global commitment to meeting the humanitarian needs in Afghanistan. It is a testament to our shared responsibility to save lives, alleviate suffering, and protect the dignity of the Afghan people. Thank you.
Very much. It's my pleasure to now turn the floor to the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Minister for Women of Australia, Senator the Honourable Marise Payne.
Very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary-General Guterres, for convening this meeting at a critical time for Afghanistan. Australia is deeply concerned by the current situation in Afghanistan. The political situation remains unresolved. The early steps of the incoming regime have not generated confidence, and the proposed model of governance is unrepresentative. A broad-based, inclusive administration is a necessity for long-term peace, stability, and prosperity. Reports of widespread rollback of the rights of women and girls, the reintroduction of restrictions on their access to services and public spaces gives us cause for even greater concern. The social equity gains made in the last 20 years in Afghanistan, particularly for women and girls and for minorities, are essential advances that must be preserved, protected and supported, including through funded international and other programs. Terrorism remains a central point of apprehension for the international community. Terrorist organisations and the support networks upon which they depend must not be allowed to find a home inside Afghanistan, nor will the international community accept Afghanistan as a place from which terrorism is exported. The humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan is the direct result of a failure to achieve a political resolution to the conflict through an Afghan-owned and Afghan-led negotiated peace process. Our international humanitarian response must ensure that we pay particular attention to the most vulnerable, including displaced women and children who face the challenges of drought, conflict, and social exclusion. We know that the need, which was already acute before recent events, is now severe. Australia stands in solidarity with the Afghan people. We will play our part and respond to those most in need. Australia has appointed a special representative on Afghanistan to lead Australia's humanitarian and diplomatic response. We know that the international community will need to work together diplomatically and inside Afghanistan to help manage the impact of displaced and vulnerable people. We cannot do this without significant funding support. Today, I can indicate that Australia will contribute 100 million Australian dollars in humanitarian assistance for Afghanistan. This includes $65 million in immediate life-saving assistance and support to displaced people and Afghan refugees. We have also committed at least $35 million in ongoing humanitarian assistance to 2024. This builds on our $1.5 billion expenditure for Afghanistan's development over the last 20 years. We stand ready with our international partners to provide further support to Afghanistan people as the crisis evolves. We will work through our UN humanitarian partners with a specific focus on supporting women and girls. We commend UNOCHA in obtaining guarantees from the Taliban authorities for unimpeded humanitarian assistance to those most in need and for the safety and security of all humanitarian staff. We urge the observing of those guarantees. We also welcome the commitments made by other nations today and recognise the dedication of you, Secretary-General, and your staff in supporting Afghanistan at this difficult time. Australia joins calls to allow humanitarian work to proceed unimpeded. Our message to the Taliban regime is this: safe passage must be permitted to our citizens and visa holders. There must be a cessation of violence, and terrorism cannot be allowed to find a home in Afghanistan. Human rights must be upheld, especially for women and girls, and the political system of Afghanistan must be inclusive. We will judge the Taliban by its actions. Thank you, Madam Chair.